Boldwood presents Assassinations That Changed the World, written by Nigel Cawthorne and read by David Thorpe. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. Introduction. Assassination is murder by another name, usually for political or religious reasons. However, in some cases, it can be justified. Who would condemn the attempts made by the Allies and the Germans themselves to assassinate Hitler? Millions might have been saved if they had succeeded. More recently, Donald Trump gave the order to assassinate Qasem Soleimani because he was the architect of terrorism that destabilized the Middle East and threatened the lives of US troops. Barack Obama had authorized the assassination of Osama bin Laden and Abu Omar al-Baghdadi for similar reasons. These killings clearly have consequences both in the Middle East and worldwide. They were conducted clinically from thousands of miles away using drones. Such targeted killings are bound to continue as long as it can be argued that their motive is self-defense. In earlier times, assassins were not so fastidious, and there is a long history of murder for political gain. Indeed, assassination has always been part of the political repertoire since Cain killed Abel and went on to take power in the land of Nod. Alexander the Great established the greatest empire in the ancient world after his father, Philip II of Macedon, who had imperial ambitions of his own, was murdered along with the children of Philip's second wife, who might have challenged Alexander for the throne of Macedonia. The murder of Julius Caesar was supposed to protect the Roman Republic. Instead, it led to Caesar's adopted son, Octavius, becoming the first emperor of Rome as Caesar Augustus. The empire's subsequent expansion had a profound effect on European history. Before the birth of the drone, the assassin's knife, sword, or gun were wielded at close quarters. Extrajudicial murder was a messy business, and often the assassin did not benefit personally. 19-year-old Gavrilo Princip, who assassinated Archduke Franz Ferdinand, precipitating World War I, died in jail before the end of the war due to tuberculosis exacerbated by the poor prison conditions. The assassins of leading SS officer Reinhard Heydrich killed themselves after being cornered in the crypt of a church. Their supporters were murdered, along with most of the populations of the towns of Lidice and Ležáky, arbitrarily held to blame by the Nazis. The original assassins were an Islamic sect that flourished in the Middle East between the 11th and 13th centuries. The Order of the Assassins was founded by Hassan-i-Sabah, who died in 1124 in Dailam, Iran. He was the leader of the Nizari Ismailites, a breakaway group from the Ismaili branch of Shia Islam. In its early years, it considered murdering its enemies a religious duty. The Arabic name, assassin or hashishi, means hashish smoker, referring to the assassin's alleged practice of taking hashish to induce ecstatic visions of paradise before setting out to face martyrdom. The historical existence of this practice is doubtful. The stories that were told by Marco Polo and other travellers about the gardens of paradise, where the drugged devotees were given a foretaste of eternal bliss, are not confirmed by any known Ismailite source. Nor did the sect inhabit gardens stocked with fine food and beautiful women. Their dusty mountain forts were often besieged, and the presence of women was prohibited during military campaigns. In 1090, with some Persian allies, Hassan-i-Sabah seized the hill fortress of Alamut in Dailam in Iran. Opposing the growing empire of the Seljuk Turks, he established a loose but cohesive state which he defended by sending assassins into enemy camps and cities to murder the generals and statesmen who opposed him. Unable to confront the superior Seljuk armies on the battlefield, the Nizaris sent devotees to infiltrate the households of enemy leaders and kill them. Murders were often carried out in public in broad daylight for maximum effect. Their terror tactics resulted in a truce between the Seljuk and the Nizaris. The assassins were given pensions and were allowed to collect their own taxes. During the Third Crusade, they even made attempts on the life of the Muslim leader Saladin, who was a Sunni Kurd who opposed the Ismaili Shia sect. Over the 3 centuries of their existence, the assassins killed 2 caliphs along with many viziers, sultans, and crusaders who greatly feared them, though the crusaders were not averse to using murder as a tactic themselves. The assassins selected their victims strategically. They eliminated those who posed the greatest threat to Ismailis, particularly those who had committed massacres. Assassin power came to an end when the Mongols invaded Persia. One by one, their castles fell. However, the subsequent Mamluk governors used them as paid killers. Nizaris were also used as mercenaries by the kings of Hungary before they were expelled by the Inquisition. As the influence of the Nizaris continued to wane, their beliefs were considered a minor heresy. But cult followers are still found in Iran, Persia, India, Pakistan, and Central Asia. The Muslim world still seems to be the epicenter of assassination, both as its perpetrators and its victims. America also has a formidable record. 4 presidents and several candidates have fallen foul of the assassin's bullet. Assassinations often have terrible consequences. They can also change the world. Here are 48 of them which might be thought significant. Nigel Cawthorne, Bloomsbury, March 2020. Chapter 1. Qasem Soleimani, 2020. Major General Qasem Soleimani was the head of the Quds Force, the unit of Iran's Revolutionary Guard responsible for unconventional warfare and military intelligence. It specialized in extraterritorial activities, supporting Hezbollah in the Lebanon, Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, Yemeni Houthis fighting the Saudis, and Shia militias in Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan. Considered by the CIA as the single most powerful operative in the Middle East, Soleimani was designated a terrorist by the United States and sanctioned by the European Union and United Nations. On the 2nd of January 2020, Soleimani flew from Tehran to Damascus. From there, he was driven to Beirut, where he met Hezbollah's Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah. They discussed the latest developments in Iraq, especially the US airstrikes that had hit Iraqi Shiite paramilitary groups Kataib Hezbollah and the attack on the American embassy in Baghdad a few days earlier. Their aim was to coordinate the work of Iran-backed armed factions in the region, preparing them to comprise a united front in any confrontation with the US. That evening, Soleimani returned to Damascus. There, he boarded a regular Cham Wings passenger flight to Baghdad, scheduled to depart at 8:20 p.m. But the departure was delayed until 10:28 p.m. The revised arrival time was sent to Abu Mahdi al-Mohandes, deputy head of the Hasht al-Shabi Iraqi paramilitary in Syria, a long-standing ally of the Iranian general and a close friend. Mohandes headed to the airport with a small reception party and 2 vehicles, ready to whisk Soleimani back to the comparative safety of Mohandes's home in the green zone of the Iraqi capital. Like Soleimani, Mohandes had been on the US Most Wanted list for years and was seen as the most dangerous man in Iraq. They both avoided using electronic devices like smartphones and followed strict security measures to keep them below the American radar. The number of people who had access to the details of their movements was strictly limited. They always travelled without announcing their destination or advance dates using regular airlines. They did not pass through formal channels to have their passports stamped at airports, and they moved around on the ground in undistinguished cars accompanied by the fewest number of people. This made it difficult to track them, though both Damascus and Baghdad airports were full of American intelligence assets. Nevertheless, it is clear that Soleimani's movements were being closely monitored. Mohandes called Mohammad Reda, a close aide responsible for the Hashd al-Shabi's arrangements in the airport, and gave him orders to drive him to the airport to collect a special guest. Security at the airport was managed by the British company G4S, under the supervision of the Iraqi intelligence and national security services. Security measures required ordinary passengers heading in and out of the airport to pass through several checkpoints deployed along 10 kilometres of road from Abbas ibn Firnas Square on the outskirts of Baghdad to the airport itself. However, travellers and officials who had a special escort were allowed to pass along a VIP route that required only informing a single checkpoint of the traveller's identity and the vehicle's physical and registration details. This information was shared with airport security, national security and intelligence, and G4S. It was known that Reda only drove for Mohandes, while Mohandes would only travel to the airport to meet Soleimani. They arrived in time to collect Soleimani and his two companions, one of whom was his son-in-law, who landed at 12:32 a.m. The meeting was kept deliberately low-key. National security officials handled the distinguished guests' travel documents and collected their luggage, which was loaded onto a Hyundai Starks minibus and a Toyota Avalon. Already, a US Air Force MQ-9 Reaper drone and other military aircraft were loitering in the sky above. At 12:47 a.m., as the two vehicles were heading down the VIP route towards western Baghdad, the Reaper launched 3 missiles. One hit the Hyundai Starks, which was travelling around 100 to 120 metres from the other vehicle. The second missed the Toyota, which attempted to speed away. A third finished the job. The Iraqi authorities needed several hours to identify the victims, some of whom had been completely vaporized. However, Soleimani's remains were easy to spot, thanks to a large and distinctive ring carrying a dark red stone he wore on his left hand. US President Donald Trump had ordered the assassination in June 2019 if Iran's increased aggression resulted in the death of an American, though he retained the final sign-off on any specific operation to kill Soleimani. He did so when 33-year-old defense contractor Narez Hamid, an immigrant from Iraq who had become a naturalized American citizen, was killed in a rocket attack on an Iraqi military base by Iranian proxies on the 27th of December. The attack also wounded 4 US military personnel. Targeting Soleimani specifically had been under consideration since 2017, and his movements had been tracked by US intelligence. As early as 2007, President George W. Bush had designated the Quds Force a foreign terrorist organization. 4 years later, the administration of Barack Obama announced new sanctions on Soleimani and 3 other senior Quds Force officials in connection with an alleged plot to assassinate the Saudi ambassador to the United States. Then, in April 2019, Trump designated the entire Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps a foreign terrorist organization. White House officials at the time refused to say whether that meant the United States would target Revolutionary Guard leaders, as it does the leadership of other terrorist groups, such as the Islamic State militant group and Al-Qaeda. Iran retaliated by designating the US military a terrorist organization. Justifying the attack, the US Defense Department issued a statement saying, "General Soleimani was actively developing plans to attack American diplomats and service members in Iraq and throughout the region." General Soleimani and his Quds force were responsible for the deaths of hundreds of American and coalition service members and the wounding of thousands more. Born in 1957, as a teenager, Soleimani had come under the thrall of radical preacher Hojat Kamyab, a protege of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who went on to become Iran's president, then supreme leader. It was Kamyab, Soleimani said, who spurred him to revolutionary activities. After the overthrow of the Shah of Iran in 1979, he joined the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, established to prevent a military counter-coup toppling the new government. It was then he got his only formal military training, which lasted just 2 months. He was sent first to help suppress a Kurdish separatist uprising in the northwest of Iran, and later served throughout the brutal Iran-Iraq War, taking part in most major military operations. This gave him a taste for the battlefield, which he described as mankind's lost paradise. After the war, he concentrated on combating drug trafficking along the Afghan border. Success there led to him being appointed head of the Quds Force, which takes its name from the Arabic for Jerusalem. The elite unit's founding pledge is to take control of that city. While its role was extraterritorial, he had considerable influence at home, winning the ear of Khamenei, who described him as a living martyr. He was also part of a group of Revolutionary Guard commanders who wrote a letter warning reformist President Mohammad Khatami to put down student protests or risk their intervention. Police moved in to crush protests, as they would again a decade later. He was more important than the president, spoke to all factions in Iran, had a direct line to the supreme leader, and was in charge of Iran's regional policy, said Dina Esfandiari, a fellow at the Century Foundation think tank. It doesn't get more important and influential than that. Despite his shadowy activities, he became a well-known public figure, with the government projecting him as a pious patriot and national champion. He enjoyed genuine popularity in Iran, despite many Iranians' suspicions of the security forces. There was even talk of him running for president, though he denied political ambitions. Although an outspoken enemy of the US, he joined the fight against the Taliban following 9/11, though pulled out of the informal alliance in 2002 when President Bush named Iran as part of the Axis of Evil in his State of the Union address. During the height of the US war in Iraq in 2006, for example, when Iranian armed and trained militias were planting lethal roadside bombs targeting US troops, the Bush administration debated how to confront Soleimani and his operatives in Iraq. That same year, he oversaw the conflict in Lebanon during the Israel-Hezbollah war. His ground forces were also supported by US airstrikes in the battle against ISIS, after he assumed personal control of the Iranian intervention in the Syrian civil war, supporting the government of Bashar al-Assad. After his assassination, there was a debate about whether his killing was legal under international human rights law. For his funeral, thousands turned out chanting "Death to America! Death to Israel!" On the 8th of January 2020, the Iranian military launched ballistic missiles at 2 US bases in Iraq in retaliation. As there were no reported American casualties, the US made no response. However, the following month, it was revealed that over 100 US troops had suffered traumatic brain injuries in the attack. Although the assassination of Soleimani removed one of the US's most determined foes, it did little to ease the conflict in the Middle East. Indeed, it threatened war between the US and Iran, an outcome that may yet inevitably happen. Chapter 2. Jamal Khashoggi, 2018. A Gulfstream jet with tail markings HZSK1 touched down at Istanbul's Ataturk Airport at 3:13 a.m. on the 2nd of October 2018. It had come from Riyadh, the capital of Saudi Arabia. 9 members of the Saudi security forces disembarked and checked into 2 Istanbul hotels not far from the Saudi consulate. Dissident Saudi Arabian journalist Jamal Khashoggi, a 59-year-old columnist for the Washington Post and a prominent critic of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, aka MBS, arrived at the consulate at 1:14 p.m. Son of a well-connected family, Khashoggi was an unlikely dissident. His grandfather, Mohammed Khaled Khashoggi, was personal physician to King Ibn Saud, the founder of Saudi Arabia, a status that allowed the family to achieve prominence. Mohammed was the father of the late billionaire arms dealer Adnan Khashoggi, who was the middleman in the Iran-Contra scandal in the 1980s. Adnan was once a neighbour of Donald Trump and sold him a $200 million yacht. Mohammed's daughter was Samira. She married Mohammed Al-Fayed, the former owner of Harrods, making Jamal first cousin to Dodi Al-Fayed, who died alongside Princess Diana in her fatal car crash in Paris in 1997. In the mid-1980s, Jamal was writing for English-language newspapers such as the Saudi Gazette and Arab News. Then, as editor of Al-Madina, one of Jeddah's oldest newspapers, from 1991 to 1999, he covered foreign news, travelling to Algeria, Kuwait and Sudan, and reporting on the First Gulf War. He became well known for his interviews with Osama bin Laden, then head of the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. From this, it was clear he had connections to the Saudi intelligence service. In 1999, Khashoggi became the deputy editor-in-chief of Arab News, the biggest English-language daily in the country, and a key interlocutor for Western journalists dealing with the Saudi royal family. 4 years later, he became the editor-in-chief of the Saudi Arabian daily Al-Watan, but was dismissed by the Saudi Arabian Ministry of Information because he had allowed a columnist to criticize the founding father of Wahhabism, the state religion of Saudi Arabia. He went into voluntary exile in London as media advisor to Prince Turki Al Faisal, then ambassador in London, but formerly the head of Saudi intelligence from 1977 to 2001. Khashoggi was permitted to return to Saudi Arabia as editor of Al-Watan in 2007, but was dismissed a second time 3 years later. Khashoggi was hired by a new news channel in Bahrain backed by Saudi Arabian billionaire Prince Al-Walid bin Talal. However, it was closed down by the Bahraini government on its first day after airing an interview with a member of the opposition. Al-Walid bin Talal was detained by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman on allegations of corruption in 2017. Khashoggi himself fell out with MBS for criticising his conduct of the war in the Yemen and his crackdown on dissidents. Eventually, he was barred by the Saudi authorities from publishing or appearing on television after criticising US President-elect Donald Trump, a political ally and business associate of MBS. In June 2017, after a series of arrests, Khashoggi fled Saudi Arabia with only 2 suitcases and found refuge in the US, where he wrote a monthly column for the Washington Post. He also pledged $30,000 towards a social media protest against the Saudi regime, which included sending untraceable SIM cards to activists in Saudi Arabia. In self-imposed exile in Virginia, Khashoggi planned to marry 36-year-old PhD student Hatice Cengiz and needed copies of divorce papers from his previous wife. Hatice was a Turkish national, and they planned to marry in Turkey. So the Saudi ambassador in Washington, D.C., Prince Khalid bin Salman bin Abdulaziz Al Saud, MBS's brother, directed Khashoggi to pick up the paperwork at the consulate in Istanbul, assuring him he would be safe. Khashoggi visited the consulate on Friday the 28th of September 2018, but the divorce papers were not ready, and he was told to return the following Tuesday the 2nd of October. This gave the Saudis 4 days to plan how to get rid of the troublesome journalist. By the time Khashoggi entered the consulate at about 1 p.m. on the 2nd of October, a second Gulfstream jet, tail markings HZSK2, had landed at Ataturk Airport. Like the first, it carried passengers who were military personnel or intelligence officers, all of whom were close associates of Mohammed bin Salman. They had entered the consulate around noon. Fearing there may be trouble, Khashoggi was accompanied to the consulate by his fiancée Hatice, who waited outside. She was told that if he did not emerge in an hour, she should call a friend and fellow journalist who had the ear of the Turkish government. When Khashoggi entered the consulate, he was ushered to the second floor of the building and into the office of the Consul General Mohammed al-Otaibi. Waiting in nearby rooms were the 15 men who had arrived on the Saudi jets. Among them were Maher Abdulaziz Mutreb, a colonel who was attached to the Crown Prince's security detail, and Salah Mohammed al-Tabagi, the head of forensics in the kingdom's General Intelligence Directorate. Turkish employees of the consulate had been given the afternoon off, and the consulate's CCTV had been disabled. Not long after Khashoggi entered the Consul General's office, Mutreb came in. He told Khashoggi that he had to return to Saudi Arabia. Khashoggi refused. There followed a Skype call to Saud al-Qahtani, one of the Crown Prince's closest advisors. Khashoggi was then told he would be taken back to Saudi Arabia by force if necessary. Khashoggi warned that someone was waiting outside for him with instructions to inform the authorities if he did not reappear. During the following 7 minutes, Khashoggi was beaten and tortured. He was held down while his fingers were cut off, a punishment that the Crown Prince ordered for writers who criticised him. Khashoggi was injected with a drug to silence him and throttled. Then he was dragged into another room where he was dismembered on a meeting table while still breathing. This was done by Tabagi, the forensic scientist who specialised in conducting autopsies and was equipped with a bone saw for the purpose. Tabagi relished his work. He put on headphones and is heard to say to his colleagues, "When I do this job, I listen to music. You should do that too." It is like Pulp Fiction, a Turkish official told the New York Times. The whole thing was videotaped so that MBS could see that his orders had been carried out. Khashoggi's fingers would also be delivered to him as further proof. What happened to the rest of his body is open to conjecture. It has never been found. Some 2 hours after Khashoggi entered the consulate, 6 vehicles left. 2 arrived at the residence of Mohammed al-Otaibi, the Saudi Consul General, 500 yards away, at 3:09 p.m. One of the vehicles, a Mercedes Vito van with tinted windows, pulled into the garage there. Turkish employees at the residence had also been told to leave hastily that day. Khashoggi's remains may have been burnt in a barbecue pit there. At 6:20 p.m, one of the Saudi jets took off heading for Cairo. After spending 25 hours on the ground there, it flew on to Riyadh. The Saudi men from the first flight were seen leaving their hotels around 8 p.m. that evening. Their plane left Istanbul at 10:35 p.m. It made a stop about 170 miles to the east of Nallihan, Turkey. It then skirted the border between Iraq and Iran, favouring the Iraqi side, and crossed the Persian Gulf, landing in Dubai at 2:30 a.m. The following morning, it flew on to Riyadh. 13 passengers departed on these flights, 6 in one group, 7 in the second. At 4 p.m. on the 2nd of October, Hatice Cengiz alerted the Turkish authorities, who expressed their concern. The following day, Al Jazeera, the TV station based in Qatar, reported that Jamal Khashoggi had been abducted. The Saudi authorities issued a statement denying he was being detained, saying he visited the consulate and exited shortly thereafter. In the face of protests from the Turkish government, the police were allowed into the consulate, but not before a specialist Saudi team had given the building a thorough clean. The Saudi authorities eventually admitted that Khashoggi had been killed. While it was clear to the world that he had been murdered on the orders of the Crown Prince, renegade intelligence officers were blamed. 11 Saudi nationals were charged. Following a trial behind closed doors in Riyadh, 5, including Mutreb and Tubegi, were sentenced to death. The United Nations Rapporteur on Summary Executions, Agnes Kalamard, described the sentence as a mockery of justice, as Jamal Khashoggi's death was an extrajudicial execution for which the state of Saudi Arabia is responsible, yet its masterminds walk free. Meanwhile, MBS and President Trump still talk on the phone. Later, it was revealed that the American administration was making a secret deal to supply Saudi Arabia with nuclear technology and, during the 2016 election, Donald Trump was privately setting up companies in Saudi Arabia to support the luxury beach resort MBS was building on the Red Sea coast. Chapter 3. Kim Jong-nam, 2017. Born in 1971, Kim Jong-nam was the eldest son of Kim Jong-il, who succeeded his father Kim Il-sung as Supreme Leader of North Korea in 2009. However, it seems Kim Jong-nam did not want to succeed his father in the socialist world's most enduring political dynasty. After being educated in Switzerland, he preferred to enjoy the decadent pleasures offered by the Western world, rather than confining himself to the socialist paradise of the world's last hardline communist state. Kim Jong-nam's mother, Song Hye-rim, was a leading actress at the North Korea film studio, who divorced her husband to live in secret with heir apparent Kim Jong-il. When Kim Jong-nam returned to North Korea at the age of 18, he found himself and his mother sidelined, as his father had taken a second wife and new mistresses and had transferred his affections to the children he had by them. Kim Jong-nam was never mentioned in the North Korean media, and only a handful of the Communist Party elite knew of his existence, though he was responsible for a number of IT projects. In 1995, he began making clandestine visits to Japan. This came to the attention of the world in 2001 when Kim Jong-nam and his entourage, bedecked in diamond-encrusted Rolex watches and toting Louis Vuitton bags, were stopped at Narita Airport, reportedly en route to Disneyland in Tokyo. Kim was travelling on a forged Dominican Republic passport bearing the name Pang Zhong, which means fat bear in Chinese. It then came out that he had entered the country at least 3 times in late 2000. A hostess at the exclusive gentleman's club Soapland in Tokyo's Yoshiwara district remembered Kim's $350 per hour visits. She also recalled a dragon tattoo on Kim's back. Tattoos are usually taboo in North Korea, though in South Korea they are the distinctive marking of criminal gangs. Kim Jong-il was furious with his son. After being deported from Japan, Kim Jong-nam went gambling in Macau. Kim's mother died in 2002, and another of Kim Jong-il's mistresses, Ko Yong-hui, who had borne him 3 children, began campaigning for her 2 sons to succeed their father. Kim Jong-chul and Kim Jong-un were promoted both to the public and, more importantly, to the military, who had a stranglehold on power in North Korea. While Kim Jong-chul was considered too effeminate for leadership, the 26-year-old Kim Jong-un was created a 4-star general and named as the dear leader's successor. When Kim Jong-il made a state visit to China the following year, Kim Jong-un was left in charge in the North Korean capital, Pyongyang. When Kim Jong-il died, on the 17th of December 2011, Kim Jong-un took over. Kim Jong-nam visited Pyongyang briefly, but did not stay for the funeral. It was thought that this was to prevent any speculation about the succession. Even so, Kim Jong-un issued a standing order to have his half-brother killed. According to South Korea's intelligence, a North Korean spy, jailed by South Korea in 2012, confessed to planning a hit-and-run on him in China. Kim Jong-nam wrote to Kim Jong-un begging for his life. "Please withdraw the order to punish me and my family," he said in the letter. "We have nowhere to hide. The only way to escape is to choose suicide." Kim Jong-nam stayed out of politics. However, while emphasizing that he had no wish to take over, in the book My Father Kim Jong-il and Me by Japanese journalist Yoji Gomi, he predicted that the North Korean regime would collapse unless reforms were made. He also said that Kim Jong-un would fail as president because he has a lack of experience, he's too young, and he didn't have enough time to be groomed. Around the same time, Kim Jong-nam's son called the North Korean regime a dictatorship on a Finnish talk show. Given that North Korean officials have been executed for slumping in their chairs at meetings, such comments would easily qualify as capital offences. Kim Jong-un's death threats could not be discounted. His uncle and political advisor, Jang Song-taek, was a reformer. He was executed for treason along with his supporters and, reportedly, members of his family, including children and grandchildren, so all traces of his existence were expunged. On the 6th of February 2017, Kim Jong-nam travelled to Malaysia on a passport in the name of Kim Chol, a pseudonym he used frequently. On the 9th of February, he was on Langkawi Island, a tourist resort off Malaysia's west coast, where he met a US national. The Japanese daily paper, Asahi Shimbun, reported that this was an intelligence agent and that a large amount of data had been transferred from Kim Jong-nam's laptop. In June 2019, reports surfaced that Kim Jong-nam had been acting as a CIA informant since his half-brother took power. While still in favour with his father, Kim Jong-nam had audited the state-run industries, often leading to the execution of factory managers. And while abroad, he managed the Kim family's accounts, which amounted to billions of dollars. Michael Madden, who runs the blog North Korea Leadership Watch, said that he had ties with Office 39, a department that seeks foreign income for the Kim regime through illicit means. There were rumours that China hoped to install Kim Jong-nam as leader in Pyongyang if Kim Jong-un fell from power. Meanwhile, China saw Kim Jong-nam as useful leverage. This gave the authorities in North Korea even more reason to kill him. Kim Jong-nam was passing through Kuala Lumpur International Airport on the 13th of February on his way back to Macau. At 9 a.m, he was attacked by two women in the departure lounge. They covered his face with a cloth laced with liquid. This turned out to be the banned nerve agent VX, which North Korea, not a signatory to the 1993 Chemical Weapons Convention, was thought to have stockpiled. He felt dizzy, and the police took him to the airport clinic. He died in the ambulance on the way to hospital. In his backpack was $100,000 in cash and 4 North Korean passports in the name of Kim Chol. The two women left the scene in a taxi. Later, 28-year-old Duan Thi Huang, a Vietnamese, and 25-year-old Siti Aisyah, an Indonesian, were arrested and charged with murder, which carried a mandatory death sentence. 4 North Koreans were also accused of orchestrating the plot, but fled Malaysia shortly after the attack and have never faced trial. The two women claimed that they were playing a prank for a reality TV program at the behest of 4 North Koreans. They had been recruited in early 2017 while working as escorts, Duan in Hanoi and Siti in Kuala Lumpur. They said they were told that they had been selected to take part in a Japanese comedy show on YouTube, where they would perform pranks by smearing lotion on people's faces. Siti said she was paid hundreds of dollars to carry out the prank at various malls in Kuala Lumpur as practice before she was brought to the airport where Kim Jong-nam was picked out as the next target for the TV show. Both Siti and Duan denied knowing who he was, nor knowing what they were doing was dangerous. However, after the attack, Duan was seen rushing to the bathroom to wash her hands. After determining that the regime had used chemical weapons in violation of international law or lethal chemical weapons against its own nationals, the US imposed additional sanctions on North Korea. South Korea also blamed the North for the assassination of Kim Jong-nam. However, South Korean President Moon Jae-in met Kim Jong-un in April 2018 to sign the Panmunjom Declaration, pledging to convert the armistice agreement ending the Korean War in 1953 into a full peace treaty. They had another meeting in May, while on the 12th of June, Kim Jong-un met President Trump in Singapore to discuss nuclear disarmament. A further meeting between Kim Jong-un and President Moon took place in September. Duan Thi Huang and Siti Aisyah spent 2 years behind bars in adjoining cells before they were sent back to their respective countries. The prosecution withdrew the charges against Siti, while Duan was sentenced to 3 years and 4 months in jail after she pleaded guilty to voluntarily causing hurt by dangerous means to Jong-nam. An appeal by the prosecution was thrown out. "Duan and I grew very close over the course of the trial," said Siti. "I always gave my support to her, and she always gave her support to me. When I cried, she would always console me, and when she cried, I would do the same for her. I think of her as my own sister." While the North Korean regime has never formally confessed to the assassination, in late 2018 they reportedly expressed regret to Vietnam, a strategic ally, for involving one of their citizens. Meanwhile, Kim Jong-un continued ordering the gruesome execution of those who opposed him. Reports emerged in 2020 that he threw one of his generals into a tank of flesh-eating piranhas after being accused of planning a coup. The unnamed general had his arms and torso cut open with knives before being tossed in, according to sources. It was thought that Kim Jong-un drew inspiration from the 1977 James Bond movie You Only Live Twice, where villain Helga Brandt is devoured by piranhas as a punishment for not killing 007. Chapter 4. Joe Cox, 2016. Thankfully, political assassination is a rare thing in the UK. Since the 1812 assassination of Spencer Perceval, the only Prime Minister to have been killed in office, only 7 sitting MPs have been murdered, 6 of them by Irish Republicans. Following the 1998 Good Friday Agreement, political violence was thought to have become a thing of the past. But on the 16th of June 2016, 41-year-old Jo Cox, the Labour MP for Batley and Spen, was gunned down and stabbed in her constituency by a deranged neo-Nazi white supremacist. It was the first murder of an MP since the assassination of Ian Gow, Conservative MP for Eastbourne. He was killed in 1990 by the Provisional IRA, who exploded a bomb under his car outside his home in East Sussex. Jo Cox was born Helen Joanne Ledbetter in Batley in 1974 and brought up in nearby Heckmondwicke, which is also in the constituency of Batley and Spen in West Yorkshire. Her mother Jean was a school secretary, and her father Gordon was a factory worker in Leeds. She read social and political science at Cambridge, the first in her family to go to university. It was not an experience she enjoyed. I never really grew up being political or Labour. It kind of came at Cambridge, where it was just a realisation that where you were born mattered, that how you spoke mattered, who you knew mattered, she said. I didn't really speak right or know the right people. I spent the summers packing toothpaste at a factory, working where my dad worked, and everyone else had gone on a gap year. To be honest, my experience at Cambridge really knocked me for about 5 years. Her university experience led her to join the Labour Party. After graduating, she worked for Oxfam, becoming head of policy, and was an advisor to Labour MP Joan Whalley, Gordon Brown's wife Sarah, and then Glenys, now Baroness, Kinnock. By the end of the 1990s, she was head of campaigns for the pro-European pressure group Britain in Europe. After further studies at the London School of Economics, she built a career working for charities, including Save the Children and the NSPCC. Her work took her to some of the world's most dangerous war zones. I've been in some horrific situations, where women have been raped repeatedly in Darfur. I've been with child soldiers who have been given a Kalashnikov and kill members of their own family in Uganda, she said. In Afghanistan, I was talking to Afghan elders who were world-weary of a lack of sustained attention from their own government and from the international community to stop problems early. That's the thing that all of that experience gave me. If you ignore a problem, it gets worse. In 2014, she was selected from an all-women shortlist to fight the safe Labour seat of Batley and Spen at the 2015 election, after the previous MP, Mike Wood, retired. She increased the Labour majority by 2,000 votes. Arriving in Westminster, she told the Yorkshire Post, "Having gone through that experience of being in a Cambridge college, surviving it and building myself up, meant that coming here was a walk in the park, and a lot of the same people are here." In Parliament, she joined the Communities and Local Government Select Committee and used her maiden speech to urge the government to live up to its rhetoric about building a northern powerhouse, urging more regional devolution and increased funding for local authorities. She also established and became co-chairman of a new all-party parliamentary group on Syria, chaired the Labour Women's Network, and was a senior advisor to the Freedom Fund, an anti-slavery charity. She lived with her husband Brendan and 2 young children, Layla and Kulin, on a converted barge moored at Tower Bridge, and in her spare time was a keen mountain climber. Jo Cox was one of 36 MPs to nominate Jeremy Corbyn as a candidate in the 2015 Labour leadership election, though she upset the Corbynite wing of the party by voting for the Blairite Liz Kendall. In May 2016, she warned that Corbyn could face a leadership challenge if Britain voted to leave the EU because of his failure to mobilise voters for the Remain campaign. "I want to see those Labour voters come out and vote Remain," she said. "If they don't, and we leave, ultimately there are many of us who think that Jeremy needs to take responsibility." In the run-up to the 2016 EU referendum, she was getting out of a car to meet constituents at a routine surgery in Birstall when she was confronted by 52-year-old unemployed gardener Thomas Mayer. Yelling, "This is for Britain," "Keep Britain independent," and "Britain first," he shot her twice in the head and once in the chest with a sawn-off .22 Weihrauch bolt-action hunting rifle. Wounds to her hands showed Jo had raised them to try to defend herself. She was then stabbed 15 times, including in the heart and lungs, with a 7-inch blade. The attacker then kicked her as she bled to death. Despite emergency surgery at the scene, she died in the back of the ambulance. The gun and the knife were later found in Mayer's backpack. Blood on the handle of the knife contained a major DNA profile matching that of Jo Cox and a minor DNA profile of Mayer. Her blood was also found on the barrel of the gun. The attack was witnessed by retired mine rescuer Bernard Carter Kenny, who had run to Cox's assistance. Mayer turned and stabbed him in the stomach. Bleeding profusely, Carter Kenny staggered across the road and found safety in a shop. Bloodstains around a cut on the gilet he was wearing were also found to contain the MP's DNA. Carter Kenny survived and was awarded the George Medal for bravery. Mayer walked calmly away from the attack. He disappeared behind a pub, took off his jacket and swapped his white baseball cap for a black one. The authorities were already on their way. Shelley Morris, who had also witnessed the attack, had called 999. She said she saw a man with a large steak knife with a jagged blade, which he wielded in a stabbing motion. The attacker stood over a figure and fired a gun twice, according to her account. Mayer was arrested leaving the scene by PC's Craig Nichols and Jonathan Wright. They were awarded the Queen's Gallantry Medal. According to Detective Superintendent Nick Wallen of the West Yorkshire Police, Mayer was a loner in the truest sense of the word. This is a man who never held down a job, never had a girlfriend, never any friends to speak of. Nor was he on any watch list. He had never had so much as a conversation with the police. When the police searched the semi-detached council house where Mayer had been living alone since the death of his grandmother 3 years earlier, they found Nazi regalia, far-right books, and instructions for making bombs. He had collected newspaper cuttings about Anders Breivik, the far-right terrorist who killed 77 people in Norway in 2011, and searched the internet for, among other things, accounts of the murder of Ian Gow. He also drew inspiration from David Copeland, who planted nail bombs aimed to kill black, Asian and gay people in London in 1999. Mayer stole the bolt-action rifle he used from the boot of a sports utility vehicle in August 2015. The stock and most of the barrel had been removed, leaving it just 12 inches long so it could easily be hidden under his clothes. He carried out online research into .22 ammunition, reading one page that offered an answer to the question, "Is a .22 round deadly enough to kill with one shot to a human's head?" He also bought a replica British Army World War II dagger. Remanded in Westminster Magistrates Court, when asked what his name was, he said, "My name is Death to Traitors, Freedom for Britain." He refused to plead, and the judge entered a not guilty plea on his behalf and remitted him for trial at the Old Bailey. There, on the 14th of November 2016, Thomas Mayer was convicted of Cox's murder, grievous bodily harm for stabbing Bernard Carter Kenny, being in possession of a firearm with intent, and the possession of a dagger. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. After the murder, President Barack Obama spoke to Joe's widower Brendan Cox from Air Force One. A White House statement said, President Obama offered his sincere condolences on behalf of the American people to Mr. Cox and his 2 young children, as well as to her friends, colleagues, and constituents. The President noted that the world is a better place because of her selfless service to others, and that there can be no justification for this heinous crime, which robbed a family, a community, and a nation of a dedicated wife, mother, and public servant. Prime Minister David Cameron and Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn united to pay tribute to Labour MP Jo Cox in the West Yorkshire town where she was killed. It was one of the few things they could agree on. Chapter 5. Osama bin Laden, 2011. In August 2010, a trusted aide of Osama bin Laden received a phone call. He had no idea that simple act of answering his phone would lead US intelligence to the location of his boss, who, since 9/11 in 2001, had been the world's most wanted terrorist. The phone call was made to Abu Ahmed al-Kuwaiti, aka Arshad Khan. He was outside a walled compound called Waziristan Haveli in Abbottabad, northeast Pakistan. American intelligence had been looking for bin Laden for 9 years. He was savvy enough to know that he could not use any form of electronic communication which would be bound to come to the attention of the NSA, the American National Security Agency, which collects signals intelligence. So, messages had to be carried by a courier. When the CIA captured al-Qaeda's third-in-command and operations leader Khalid Sheikh Mohammed in 2003, he had given up the code names of several of bin Laden's couriers. The following year, interrogation of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed's successor, Abu Faraj al-Libi, also yielded the name of Arshad Khan. The CIA believed that if they could track him down, he would lead them straight to bin Laden. In August 2010, the phone call to Arshad Khan was picked up by the NSA. Looking closer, they noticed that there were no telephone lines coming in and out of the compound at Abbottabad. Nor was it connected to the internet. Few people went in and out, and they burnt all their trash. The CIA began to suspect that bin Laden was hiding there in plain sight, but there was no way to be sure. They continued to watch the place for 8 months before, in February 2011, they reported to President Barack Obama that the compound contained a high-value target, very possibly Osama bin Laden. The president then gave the order to go in. On Sunday, the 1st of May 2011, as the clock approached midnight local time, 4 helicopters flew out of Bagram Air Base in southeastern Afghanistan and crossed over the border into Pakistan. They were headed for the city of Abbottabad, which is 70 miles to the north of Pakistan's capital, Islamabad. The 4 helicopters, 2 Sikorsky UH-60 Black Hawks and 2 Boeing CH-47 Chinooks, maintained a low altitude over the Hindu Kush Mountains to avoid being detected by radar. The Black Hawks had also had their rotors and stabilizers modified for additional stealth. They had to ensure that they would not be detected. The 4 helicopters held a contingent of 79 Special Forces commandos and 1 sniffer dog. When told, "We think